Welcome back to the Retirement Fiduciary Podcast, your classroom for no BS financial education. A place where we have authentic discussions about retirement planning, investment management, tax reduction strategies, insurance estate planning, and more. Here's your host, Adam Koch, President, Portfolio Manager, and Senior Financial Advisor at Libertas Wealth Management Group.
What's going on, everybody? Thank you so much for joining us today. As always, let's get started with just a few housekeeping items. If this is your first time listening or watching, thank you so much for joining us. The Retirement Fiduciary Podcast is an authentic educational show aimed at providing honest, candid, fiduciary-driven insights for individuals and couples all over the country. The podcast is produced bi-weekly as we cut through all the noise in the markets, dropping no-nonsense, unbiased knowledge to help you make work optional someday, all while living the lifestyle you've always wanted. Be sure to subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You can also find us on TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter, and YouTube. Finally, to learn more about what we do and how we work with our clients, simply head over to libertaswealth.com. Today on the podcast, we have another special guest in Natalie Siston, a longtime friend and client. She's the founder of Small Town Leadership, not to mention an accomplished speaker and best-selling author. She has more than 20 years of experience in coaching, developing leaders, and strengthening teams in the nonprofit, higher education, and corporate sectors. She's a two-time graduate of The Ohio State University and a professional certified coach through the International Coaching Federation. Even though Natalie has presented to thousands of people around the world, both in person and virtually, her proudest speaking moment is winning a ribbon at the Ohio State Fair when she was 10 years old for demonstrating how to make oatmeal cookies. I love that. The story and many others are featured in her best-selling book, Let Her Out, Reclaim Who You've Always Been, so check that out on Amazon. She lives in Dublin, Ohio with her husband and two daughters, and in her free time, she loves watching her daughters dance, run, play soccer, and softball, and of course, spoiling her two rescue dogs. So please enjoy my conversation today with Natalie Siston. All right, everybody, today on the podcast, we are thrilled to welcome a good friend, longtime friend, an accomplished speaker, author, founder of Small Town Leadership, with over 20 years of experience in coaching and leadership development across various sectors. We'll get into more of that in the bookend, which you already just listened to. Natalie brings a wealth of knowledge and inspiration to people both employed and self-employed alike. Her best-selling book, Let Her Out, Reclaim Who You Always Have Been, is something we'll surely talk a little bit about, actually probably talk a lot about it. But first, Natalie, thanks so much for jumping on the show.
Oh, Adam, it's a pleasure. I'm so glad to be here.
Yeah, this is going to be fun. I read your book, man. How long has it been since you wrote it?
4 years ago.
I was going to say 4 years. I don't want to embarrass myself. Yeah. I read it, like I did the audiobook thing,
Yeah,
and
so you would have listened to it in 2021. I released the audiobook in 2021.
Which is how was that, by the way? Not to go completely off the rails here, but I was talking to somebody else just recently who recently wrote a book, and they said that, I said I like audiobooks. That's what I personally I struggle to read print. I get distracted. I find myself going over 2 pages and I don't realize what I've read at all, and I have to start over. But if I listen to it, I can absorb it so easily for some reason. So why would somebody say, or why might somebody say, I don't really want to do an audiobook that's kind of a whole new level of pain in the butt? Like, what was it a hard thing to do?
Well, I think that's probably what most people would say, but I'm a figure outer kind of person. And I also like audiobooks. So my reading and listening habits is that I read fiction. I like to open the spine of the book and I check it out from the library and have a bookmark, and that's every day I read fiction that way. But I listen to personal development books and nonfiction books. And so to me, it just then made sense. Well, I have to record this book. And so it was really just a matter of logistics, to your point. And it was for me, excuse me. And this is what happened during the recording of the audiobook.
I'm sure.
It's finding a studio who could accommodate recording and then producing the book. And so I found a great studio here in Columbus that recorded the book and edited it and put it out into the world. What's interesting to me, because I actually listen to my book in advance of keynotes and stuff. It helps me hone in on messages I'm giving. It's like my own reinforcement. I recorded the book exactly the speed I talk, which is probably a little quicker than normal. So whenever I'm listening to a book, I know I have to listen on like 1.5 speed. I recorded my book exactly how I talk. So if you haven't read or listened to Let Her Out and you want to listen to an author speak how she speaks, go check it out.
Yeah.
4 hours, 16 minutes.
I think it's a I don't want to say a perfect length, but I feel like when they get beyond 8 hours, it's like, but But yeah, no, you're right. I didn't think about that, about the speed, because I usually have it at 1.25 or 1.5 whenever I'm listening. But in your case, I just hit 1.0 and it was good to go. But that's interesting. So it wasn't that big of a pain after all, huh? To kind of record your own audiobook.
Listening to, I mean, any speaker will probably tell you listening to their own voice is painful. And so I still have that experience. I had to listen, frame by frame, minute by minute to catch small edits I wanted to make. That was probably tedious and hard, but now that it's out into the world, it's pretty cool to be like,
Yeah.
well,
Well,
I'm
I'm really
not.
glad you did that, because I think that I mean, some people like to listen, some people like to read. I think you got the biggest audience as a result, that's for sure. But
Exactly.
let's rewind. Let's go backwards in time. I don't want to rewrite the book here, no pun intended. But how would you say growing up in a small town, being brought up in a small town, influenced your leadership style? In a big city like Columbus, Ohio, career choices, things like that.
Yeah, it's a great question. And that's obviously the first brand that I started is called Small Town Leadership. And I grew up, for those wondering, in a town called Republic, Ohio. It's Northwest Ohio near Tiffin, population 600, and no stoplights, one stop sign, depending on which way you're coming in and out. How growing up in that small town influenced my leadership style was by getting to know and understanding the people impact of everything. Because growing up in a small town, any event that happens, whether it's a good event, it's a celebration, it's the team winning the state championship, or it's a big tragedy or a fire that devastates a large area, or in our case, tornadoes that tears people's houses down. The people impact of those things is always so great. And that's where I've always gravitated toward in my career, no matter what role I've been playing. And I think it's because of it's just the human impact of every domino that falls. And that's what had me interested in personal development. It's what got me interested in leadership. It's what got me interested in coaching, because I just love watching the people dynamics. And I've brought that with me every place I've been. I went to Ohio State, so going from small town to huge university, it was all about how is this people dynamic at this big campus. I moved to California after graduating, and I worked at Stanford. So once again, other different people dynamics, and then brought it when I moved back to Ohio, did my MBA and worked in corporate, and now on my own. It's just that constant watching how the people dynamics work is fascinating to me.
Yeah, was there a moment, a story that you could share from your book that, maybe early, whether it's childhood or early career, doesn't really make a difference, that kind of shaped your approach, kind of like that created a theme for your coaching, so to speak?
I'm not sure if it ties to my coaching necessarily, but I think it ties to my leadership philosophy and why the small town piece works so well. And it's interesting. I will have to go back and look to see if the story's in the book. If it's not, consider this cutting room floor material that didn't make it. But when I was getting ready to go to Ohio State, I was working at a bank the summer before. So the small town bank in actually Attica, Ohio, the town over. The vice president of the bank asked me to come into his office, and he wanted to impart the advice because he was an alum. And he said, Natalie, just be prepared. You've been a big fish in a small pond for a very long time. You're about to go be a small fish in a really big pond. And I thought about those words a lot. And I loved that feeling for a couple of weeks, Adam. Like for a couple of weeks at Ohio State, I was like, this is amazing. Like
Hmm.
nobody knows where I am. I was just, I could do whatever. That's a new experience. I never had that in 18 years of my life. Like people always knew where I was, or they always knew who my parents were. But for this first time in my life, I was like, oh, I'm anonymous. And then I just realized I got really lonely because I like to know people. I like to be known. And from that part forward, it was really taking on leadership roles and stepping in to say, okay, vice president of the bank, I see you. I've experienced that, but I want to be a bigger fish in this bigger pond. And that's the spirit that I take with me in everything I do. And that's what I try to encourage my clients to do, is to really take up the space that they deserve to take up.
Do you think that it has anything to do with the fact that you went from small town to big city to different big city back to big city, and then ended up going from being I don't want to say a small fish in a big pond, but a fish of many fish, a school of fish, if you will, to running your own company again and kind of going into the entrepreneurial journey and kind of being a place where you can stand up on a pedestal and, speak your voice? Does that have anything to do with that?
I haven't connected those dots too much, Adam. I think I'll need to reflect on that a little bit. I think what I've learned more about myself on this whole journey is probably through assessments, through hiring my own coaches. And one of the assessments that I have my clients take is called the motivators assessment. Many people are familiar with DISC assessment,
Hmm.
behavioral communication preferences, what you see of somebody on the outside. And then I also, along with the DISC, give something called motivators, because that's the side you don't see of people. But once you know, you're like, oh my gosh, this explains so much about you. And so I have two dimensions that are very high on the motivators. One is individualistic and one is regulatory. So individualistic, my words, not the assessment company's words, is the special snowflake syndrome. Just like to be out in the world, like to have a platform, like to have my ideas heard. So I have that high. And I also have high regulatory, which is I like rules, I like regulations if I create them. I think when you marry those two pieces together, you've got a really perfect combination for someone who makes a great self-employed entrepreneur, because you have ideas that you want the world to hear and you're willing to establish the processes, the procedures to put those into place.
That's interesting. I heard somebody say once that about a potential employee they were looking to hire, and it's somebody who had done an assessment that they're a team player as long as they're leading the team. I thought that was pretty funny.
That would probably be a way someone would probably read my results for sure.
Well, so looking back, I mean, you spent a good part of your career, working in corporate America, whereas now, well, you've spent time in a couple different ways as an entrepreneur. Is the grass greener for those who are considering it?
It's a really great question, and one that a lot of the coaching clients who come to me because I'm reflecting something that they want either to accomplish themselves or do. And so I find myself talking to a lot of people in corporate roles who are asking me this question. And I tell them, would I go back? No, I'm extremely happy with where I am in my career. And I'm also really fortunate because I've created roles and I've created pockets of the portfolio of work I do where I am engaged with teams. I am engaged with organizations. I am engaged with leadership. And so I think if it really is going to depend on what people are interested in. So if it's just getting up every day, doing what you want to do, and you're willing to pound the pavement to generate the business and clients to make that happen, then the grass is going to be bright green every single day. But if you wake up in the morning and you love writing, you love speaking, you love coaching, you love advising, you love consulting, but you don't love selling, you don't love making connections with new people, it's going to be really hard. So the
So,
conversation I have with a lot of people who are looking to make that leap is, if you're going to do it, be really smart about it. And I don't do this as a fear monger, as someone who's just like, I like to be a person who's motivational, inspirational, and say anything is possible. And in my case, I took 4 years to map that journey from corporate into a self-employed life, because I wanted the structures in place. I wanted a client base in place. I wanted income replacement in place. I wanted
sure.
to know how my day was going to work. And so I think if you like the idea of creating that system, the grass can be as bright as you want it to be. And if you don't, then you're going to have to figure out how to bring in people to support you in the areas that you're not as comfortable with.
Speaking of kind of the emotions that go along with all this, I mean, it's not easy to take that leap. How do you stay motivated or inspired, since you use that word, in your journey, especially when things inevitably get tough? Because I think there's this perception of entrepreneurship and business ownership where I always like to tell this story about a friend of mine. We still hang out all the time, but this was years ago. One day he says to me, after we're done playing volleyball one night, he says, "Must be nice being your own boss." And I said, "I've got 300 and some odd bosses. I don't have no boss. I have several bosses. Every client, like I am, there, I work for them, not the other way around. So, things not to say that's a bad thing, but inevitably, business is not this easy thing where, you just show up and, you kick your feet back. So, I mean, what's helped you stay inspired when things get tough? And maybe if you want, you can share an experience or a time when things were rough.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, first and foremost, almost consistently since making this leap in 2020, I've had my own coach. I've had different coaches, different types of coaches. I've been in some mastermind programs, but I'm always engaged with the coach. So, if anyone here is like, oh, I want to hire a coach, ask that coach who you're interviewing, who's your coach?
Sure.
So this is super important. I know you're totally into coaching. You've worked with coaches consistently as well. So I think that's huge because it's somebody I can go to, and maybe it's more of a business type coach, and they can help me figure out how to get the lead generation where I want it to be, or how to think about different areas of business. But really, I mean, it comes down to mindset and belief. And one of the great fortunes I've had in this last 4 years, Adam, and you've actually gotten to experience this with me, is the work of Positive Intelligence, which is a mental fitness company. So that's part of my portfolio, right? I get to work with them day in, day out, and I do the work. So not only do I help them spread their message, but I also do the work myself, which is really, how do I center my brain? How do I tame my negative thought patterns and strengthen my positive thought patterns? So when the hard days come, I've got an embedded tool set. So for
Yeah.
me, it's like I've got the embedded tool set, plus I have this external coach. And quite frankly, it's building the network of people around you who you can call, your bat phone people. And so for me, that's another set of people in similar spaces that I'm in, similar stage of business, where we can talk about the challenges freely and openly without fear of judgment. And just maybe it's a venting moment. Because to your point, yes, you have
Yeah.
300 businesses. So who is your peer set? So you've got to carve out your own peer set. So there's not one answer to this question, and it shifts over time. I think the big challenge point for me recently came last fall of 2023. My family's had a lot of transition over the past 4 years, not just me changing jobs, but we've designed and built a house.
Mhm.
I've lost my father in the midst of all of
Yeah.
this, dementia. It's my children have had challenges and struggles with, as children do right now in this world we're living in. They've changed schools. So there's been just a ton of stuff happening. And last fall, I think it finally hit me that everything I just listed to you, it just kind of hit me like, whoa, my mind, my body, my soul has been absorbing a whole lot. And what has that meant for me? And so I went through a 6-month period of time where I looked really, really deep just to figure out like what baggage of both those experiences and just from the past was I still carrying around that was creating just a lot of heaviness in my life. And so I documented that journey on LinkedIn. The journey's never over. But to me, that was a really big inflection point because I kept myself real busy. 2020, leaving role, 2021, helping care for an ill parent, and then 2022, designing a house, 2023, moving into a house, selling an old house, like busy, busy, busy. That's a way a lot of us, we just push through, we push through, we push through. And so if you can get to the point where you actually allow yourself to stop and you start to hurt, I mean, that's where I was. And I think
Mhm.
it's sometimes we actually need to let ourselves be there so we can see what's important. And I think over the past 9 months, I've gotten to see what's really important and being able to focus on those activities, people, work, relationships.
I love that. I love that you shared all that too, because I was going to start talking about the book. We're going to put the book off for we're going to put it off for a second here because I think now's a perfect time to talk about positive intelligence. You were kind enough to let me go through the program last year, and I would say, I mean, I'll let you talk about it here, but I mean, I would say it's a very, very interesting. For some, I imagine some people might think it's too deep, but it's deep. I mean, it really, you really kind of start realizing that it's possible to train your brain to or I should say retrain it to act and react to things in your life that aren't even outside influences. They're things that you create for yourself. And I thought it was interesting that you could just through mental exercises, you call it mental fitness. I thought was a pretty cool phrase. That's perfect, actually. Talk a little bit about this, I guess, and talk a little about the program. What you're doing with positive intelligence, what it does, how it works, how people feel when they go through a program like that?
I call it an app guided, peer supported, coach led program. And our founder is Shirzad Shameen. He wrote a book by the same name. So for those who are interested, check the book out first. But the book was written in 2012. And what progressed from that was the creation of now an app based program. That's what you got to experience along with a peer group that I coached. So that's the model, right? It's just
Yeah.
your group being coached while they're going through these exercises themselves. What the crux of the work is that, to use the fitness analogy, is we have muscles, and they're not actual muscles like our biceps, but we just call them that because people can conceptualize it. But we have a saboteur interceptor muscle, we have a sage muscle, and we have self-command muscle. And so all of us have negative thoughts swirling around all day long. And the goal of a program like this is to help us decrease the amount of negative thoughts we're having and increase the amount of positive thoughts. So in order to do that, we have to strengthen our saboteur interceptor muscle. So we actually have to be aware of when these negative thoughts are occurring. And then when we find, and told Adam, we're simplifying like 7 weeks of work into 5 minutes here. And I'm happy to talk to anyone offline who wants to know more. But it's you have to intercept that negative thought, and then you have to do something called strengthen your self-command, which you and I learned how to practice by doing, mental fitness exercises. We call them PQ reps, which is quieting your mind for 10 seconds to 2 minutes at a time to help you really be centered. It's crazy how much can happen in 10 seconds. We don't let ourselves even take a beat for 10 seconds.
Right.
We strengthen that self-command muscle, and then that opens up the possibility to strengthen what we call our sage, which is our positive thinking region of our brain. It's access to our creativity, access to innovation, access to love and empathy and connection. And when we can do this whole process over and over and over throughout the day, we really start to rewire our brain. And to use the analogy of exercise, you don't build biceps with one trip to the gym. You don't change your body with one 6-week program. It's continual over and over. And I've been doing this work since 2020, and I constantly am redoing the program because I'm working with client groups, or I'm helping do internal testing of the app or that kind of thing. And so I'm always finding new ways to flex these muscles, and it's really incredible. To your point, you can go as deep as you want, because a lot of this work isn't just about 10 seconds, but it's about where did these negative thought patterns come from? And this isn't a therapeutic based program, but we do ask, and I use the term wayback machine, like we do ask you to go back to that wayback machine so you can spotlight where'd that come from. That way you can start to minimize that. We aren't who we were in our past. We are who we are today. And one of the favorite phrases of positive intelligence is, how can we see every situation as a gift or opportunity? How can we see every problem and challenge as a gift and opportunity? And that is how I get to look at my life, because I've been exposed to this program and do the work every day.
Yeah, I think that as a testimonial to the program, the irony, I guess, is that I came into the program, concerned most about whether I'd have enough time. And I guess the ironic part is that's what it's all about, right? We're all too busy. We don't take time to stop. I mean, especially entrepreneurs and people, executives, D-suite, C-suite, executives, and forcing myself and having the alarms, the alerts to kind of stop. Okay, stop your life for a second, stop your work, pause, reflect, and then, work those muscles. That was really interesting. But at the end of the program, I would say that I'm generally a pretty positive person, but I would still have to say that it made me a more positive, and what I would say less assumptive is probably one of the big takeaways. It taught me not to assume as much. And then the other thing is that I just felt like I was a better person at the end of it. Like I felt like I knew myself better, and I understood why I was reacting to things the way I did when something comes at you, especially under stress, when you're busy. Something hits you and you just want to boom react real quick. You know what I mean? So anyway, we'll talk more about, getting a hold of you for that and at the end here, but I want to talk about the book.
Let me just do one final word based on what you just said, because what you said is probably more important, and you're probably even going to give yourself credit for. The biggest negative thinking pattern that each of us has is called the judge. And there's a whole section dedicated to this, both in the and the program. And the judge operates on three modes. It's a judge of self, which is pretty obvious to most of us, like we're cutting ourselves down every day. Judging others, also very easy for us to think about how we're blaming other people for the ills in our world and our life. And then, judging the circumstances of the world, which we don't often think about, but it's making our happiness conditional on, I will be happy when I get the promotion. I'll be happy when I take the leap. I'll be happy when I buy the car, whatever the case might be. And we have no idea how much that judge is weighing us down until we start to intercept it and say, I see you, judge, stop it. And obviously there's more work to be done behind it than just saying stop it. But what you're describing, Adam, is perfect interception of judge when it comes into your life. And if we can minimize the strength of that judge, we can accomplish about anything. And this year, part of this deep work that I started doing that I mentioned, based on the heaviness coming in my life, was a huge recognition that the judge was taking up way too much space in my life, way too much space. Because I finally had space. And guess what I did? Instead of letting all the goodness in, I let the judge in. And so the antidote to the judge is empathy, which is love. And I, on my wrist, had tattooed choose love. Yeah. Because anytime that I found myself caught in that swirl, I can now look down at my wrist and in my own handwriting, see the words choose love.
I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. And speaking of the book earlier, we were talking about the book, and I really want to get into that because it's been 4 years. I know it feels like it's been 18 months or 24 months. I can't believe 4 years has gone by. But did the response to the book surprise you?
The response to the book has been fantastic and illuminating, and also it's like raising a book baby, as you and I were joking before we got this call, is like almost having a little human baby, because you just want it to shine bright and grow in the world. And it takes a lot of parenting to do that, especially in these early years of a book. I've just been really, really happy with the receptivity of the book. And actually, what's interesting to me and what I'm most excited about now is just giving the book a rebirth. I launched it in the fall of 2020. So everything was done virtually. The launch was virtual. I didn't have any author book signings, nothing like that. And the book is timeless. Like it's not captured at a moment in time. It's not how to do an effective Zoom meeting in a pandemic, right? It's like let her out, reclaim who you've always been is kind of a timeless topic. And I think it's actually even more pertinent now that we are kind of out fully in the world. And so I've started doing much, much more with my book this year than even immediately after I launched, because quite frankly, I feel like the world and my audience is ready for the message now, even more so than when I launched in 2020.
What about testimonials? Like we talked a little bit off air about, you've gotten all these reviews and all of them glowing, obviously, but was there any review or testimonial that kind of, I don't know, reinforced your mission or resonated with you deeply in any way?
There's two things I'll share on this. So the last few testimonials I've received, and they mainly come through Amazon, are all from men. And I think you're one of them, Adam, actually. This, it's just a nice surprise to see people, in their response to be like, it also works for guys. So it's great to see that the message can transcend. You don't have to be a woman to get the message out of this book. And the second story I'll share is I recently did a book tour in Florida, and I had 3 engagements along the way. And at the last stop, it was at a senior center, because I met mostly with senior groups down there. And I was a little nervous because I'm like, what do I, a 44-year-old, have to teach these people who've lived a lot longer than I have and have experience and hopefully have let her out by this point in time. So I was almost there to say, tell me, how have you continued to let her out at this stage of your life? A 92-year-old woman named Marie came to this last event. And after I opened up and shared why I wrote the book and asked them to reflect on a few questions, she's like, I finally get why I'm still here. She said her husband lived till he was 100, but has since passed. Her friends have all passed. She said, so I wake up a lot of days and I wonder why I'm still here. She's like, so this is making me realize right now that I have a purpose, and I realize I'm the one who's inspiring
Wow.
other people to be here. And I mean, I about lost it, Adam. I
Yeah,
was
that's a pretty
like, mic drop
amazing.
moment, we're done.
Jeez. Yeah.
But if someone at 92 can hear this message and realize and hopefully take this with her every day of the rest of her life, why she's here and how she can keep letting her out,
Man.
done.
Yeah.
We're
Seriously. Yeah. Well, let's not get choked up here on the show, but yeah. No, I hear what you're saying. That's huge. And what did you say earlier about oh, men reading the book when it's I just literally, I won't say what book it was, but I just literally read another book on the plane on the way back from South Korea, that was a book for women written by a woman, and it was about relationships. And I feel like your book's obviously different. It's not written about relationships with your spouse or anything like that, but I think that getting for a guy, getting a female perspective on anything is good. And I think I don't know. I don't know. For me, it was like a lot of it was the whole confidence side of the book, resilience and, building yourself back up and being okay being you. I mean, there were some things in there that I thought about, and we'll talk about it off air, but I mean, it made me think like maybe I need to do things this way instead, like the real authentic me, in certain areas of my life. And then I still tend to hold back, but I think it's a really good way to, the book you wrote is a really good way to kind of make yourself reflect and say, okay, who am I really? And how much has the environment changed me over all these years since, being a little kid when you're totally authentic and you are who you are to, being an adult and being affected by corporate America and media and, even parents and siblings and friends. So a wonderful book. If you haven't read this book, you've got to check it out. And if there's an audiobook, I mean, you can listen to it in the car, right? So check it out. Let her out. How do you see the landscape of leadership and personal development evolving in the future? Do you see it evolving, especially since COVID and now we're back to kind of everybody's hanging out again?
Yeah, I think this is truly the million and probably $1 billion question, Adam. So offline, we should solve for it, and then we can go retire to our private
Yeah.
islands. I
No.
think two things at play in this space right now is you obviously have this digital landscape where we've talked about one app and you've talked about two books, listening to them. Like, technology is going to continue to be in the space of leadership and probably influencing how leaders can lead and how they can have access to learning how to lead, which I'm all for all of that. Like, the more we can build insight from a variety of diverse voices, that's terrific. We'll all be better for that. On the other side of that is we have probably a bigger desire for connection and meaning than we've ever had.
Mm.
I wrote about this in 2018. I feel like I've always been like a beat ahead, Adam. So I feel like, what I blogged about in 2018 about meaningful connections is so important right now. I think it was easy to turn away 2020, 2021, maybe a little into 2022 from like the need to be in deep, meaningful relationships, especially when it comes to your work, because you're remote and we're dealing with chaos and we're just trying to figure out how to make it all work. And now that is either we figured it out or companies have settled into whatever way they're working, people are now coming back to the idea that I really want people to care about me. I really want to be making a contribution. I really want to be making a difference. And in that space, the human element, the face-to-face, whether that's in person or like we're doing now over Zoom, is so incredibly important. And I think leaders and leadership is going to have to continue to evolve to say, we need to be able to marry these two pieces together, and have technology enabled as much as possible, but always probably first and foremost have this human element connected to it.
100%. I totally agree. The AI can't take over that. I don't think this is one of those things that just can't replace. And what you said earlier reminded me of this. I'm a big music fan, and there's this song by Armin van Buuren. He's a DJ, but Lauren Evans sings it. And the quote in the song that I just can't get out of my mind ever, especially post COVID, is everyone's connected, but nobody is connecting. And I don't know how that couldn't be more true today.
Oh, that's so true. And I think when we do find ourselves connecting, we just, our whole body changes. Like we just feel it viscerally. And we need that for our health. Like all the research is showing that. Oh, I love that quote.
Yeah. I'll send you the song when we're done here.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, last piece here. What advice would you give somebody who's, considering a similar transition to what you've been through, corporate to self-employed life? And it doesn't just have to be advice for that person, considering taking the leap, but what advice would you give somebody who's considering, improving themselves from the standpoint of leadership, whether it be at a Fortune 500 company or doing it all on their own?
It goes back to what you just said a couple seconds ago, connecting to the work of my book, and that is being the real you. Wherever you can be the real you is the best place for you to be. So if you find yourself struggling in your corporate role, if you find yourself struggling with what's next, I would ask you examine how much you're able to be who you really are in that company, in that role, and start there. If there's a way for you to start to break free from that, maybe a shell you've put yourself in or shellac that you've put on, how can you start to chip away at that? I call those barriers in my book, but how can you start to chip away so that person's actually showing up? I guarantee you, everyone who works with you will actually appreciate it much more than you holding back. I think when we can step forward and be ourselves is when we start to say, oh gosh, I see more possibilities here. So I would tell people before you go and take the leap, do that first. And that was the first thing I did, Adam. I was planning on taking the leap in 2018 and had a very fortunate connection with a person who ended up hiring me for the final role I had in corporate, because I spilled my guts to him. I told him what my plans were. I told him what my dreams were. I told him what my goals were. And that didn't deter him. And he said, I still would like you to apply for this internal role when it comes up. And it worked out, and it worked out beautifully. And that would not have been possible had I not put myself out there. So I would say start there first. There may be a beautiful way for you to be who you are and do your greatest gifts right where you are. But if you find yourself doing that or unable because it's just too dangerous or not a place where you feel like you can do that, then it goes back to what I said earlier in our discussion is think through the steps, plan the steps, have a team around you. I mean, Adam, you were part of my team when I made my exit. Like I sat down with you just to say, help me make sense of this financially, because I don't want to do anything that will be ruinous to my family and my future. So think about the coaches, the financial advisors, the support you're going to need to make that process happen, and have someone with you along that way. That way you can feel supported. It's different for every single one of us. If it were the same for every single one of us, there would be a guidebook. You would go buy it, put it into place, and once again, we'd all be sitting on our private islands, but It is different. And I think that's good because it helps us attract our true clients, and it helps us find the people who we're meant to serve in the world.
Yeah. So I think the bottom line is get help, get support, surround yourself with the right people, be yourself. And sometimes I think that's hard to do for some people. And I think it's also exhausting not being yourself for so long. Just wears you out and you don't even know it's wearing you out. So, and I think that so many people they're afraid to get support or help, whether it be through coaching or otherwise, because they think it's almost like there's a stigma behind it where I couldn't do it myself. But I think that, as you put it earlier, I'm big into coaching. I've got a few coaches that do different things. And it's good to have that silent partner, somebody you can, whether it's a life coach or a fitness coach or a business coach, any of those things. I mean, it's people know more than you know, and you can only read so many books. So I feel like coaching is the cheat code. But anyway, before we go, Camille, I know you've got small town leadership, you've got the book, you've got positive intelligence, you get a lot going on. Tell people how they would get a hold of you if they wanted to get a hold of you for and if there's multiple ways and for different reasons, fire away.
The best way to get a hold of me is through LinkedIn. I'm Natalie Siston, Siston. Find me on LinkedIn. That's definitely where I have the biggest following and where I do the most. And then from there, you can, click off into the worlds of Let Her Out or Small Town Leadership. But definitely connect with me on LinkedIn. We can start a conversation there.
Perfect. And then Natalie's LinkedIn link will be in the show notes as well. So for those of you that are listening or watching, you can go back to Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You can go to YouTube at the bottom in the show notes. You'll see all that there, so you can get over there. So that's all our time for the day. Thank you so much for joining me, Natalie. This was fun. It's been a while. And let's see here. Yeah, I don't think there's any charts or anything like that today. So this was just a good, fun conversation. And as I always say, there's thousands of podcasts out there, and you chose to give ours a listen today. So thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for joining us on the Retirement Fiduciary Podcast. To see any charts or images that were mentioned on this show, to check out additional articles, videos, and other educational resources, or to set up an intro call with your host, Adam Koch, just head over to libertaswealth.com. This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions. None of our shows engage in rendering legal, financial, tax, or other professional services. Always talk to a certified financial planner or fee-only fiduciary financial advisor before implementing any of the ideas shared in this episode.